There are two kinds of invisible in the world. There is the invisible you become by accident, the middle child, the quiet one, the one who does not make noise at the dinner table because you learned early that noise attracted the wrong kind of attention. And then there is the invisible you are made. Deliberately. Consistently. Over decades, by people who see you perfectly well and decide, in some unspoken agreement they never have to articulate, that what they see does not quite count. I was 48 years old on the Christmas I stood up from that table. And by then, I had been the second kind of invisible for a very long time. My name is Rosalind Fairhaven. I am an accounts manager at a mid-sized logistics firm in Columbus, Ohio, and I have worked there for 19 years, which is longer than my brother Patrick has held any single job in his life. Though you would never have known that from the way my family talked about the two of us. I have a daughter named Sylvie who is 15 and plays viola badly but with great enthusiasm and who leaves her sheet music on every flat surface in the house. I drive a 2017 Honda Civic with a dent in the rear passenger door that I've been meaning to fix for 2 years. I own my home outright. I pay my bills on the first of the month, and I pay them alone, and for 11 years I quietly paid several of my family's bills too. That is the part they forgot about. Or perhaps it is more accurate to say that they never quite noticed it in the first place. There is a particular talent some families have for receiving help without registering it as help. The money arrives, the problem disappears, the crisis resolves, and the person who made that happen gets filed under the general heading of things that work out, not under the heading of the person who made them work out. I had been filed under things that work out for a very long time. My father, Gerald Fairhaven, grew up the youngest of 3 brothers in a house in Akron, Ohio, where money was discussed in whispers and ambition was discussed in declarations. His father had owned a small plumbing supply business that did adequately but never spectacularly, and my father spent the better part of his adult life measuring himself against a standard of success he had decided, somewhere around age 30, that he would never quite reach. He became an insurance adjuster. He was good at it. He was thorough and reliable, and his clients trusted him, and none of that was enough, because the story he had written about himself required something more than thorough and reliable. It required a legacy. It required proof. Patrick was that proof, or was supposed to be. I understood this about my father by the time I was in my mid-30s. Not when I was a child. When I was a child, I simply felt it, the way children feel weather before they have words for pressure and temperature. I felt the way my father's eyes moved toward Patrick when someone at a family gathering asked what his children did for work. I felt the way he straightened slightly when Patrick walked into a room, the way the atmosphere in the house shifted and reorganized itself, as though the important person had finally arrived. I was not the important person. I was the responsible one, the one who handled things. And handling things in my father's private accounting of the world was not the same as achieving things. Achievement made noise. Achievement announced itself. What I did was quiet, and he had learned to treat quiet as absence. I do not say this with particular bitterness now. I have had enough years and enough Tuesday afternoons with Dr. Osei to understand that my father's treatment of me had very little to do with me at all. He saw in Patrick the version of himself he had most wanted to be, the one who made it, the one who broke through. His need for that to be true was so large and so old that he genuinely could not afford to look too carefully at who was actually keeping the family's lights on. His cruelty was not calculated. It was the cruelty of a man so absorbed in a story that he could not see the people standing at the edges of it. That does not mean it did not cost me. It cost me considerably. The Christmas dinner was my idea, as the dinners usually were. Patrick had moved back to the Columbus area 18 months earlier, after the marketing firm in Phoenix let him go, and his second apartment lease did not get renewed for reasons that were never fully explained to me, though I had a general sense of the shape of it. He was 44 years old, my brother, and he had a talent for landing near home without quite calling it landing. He called it regrouping. My father called it between opportunities, which he said with the satisfied air of a man who believed opportunity was always just around the corner for his son. My mother, Vera, called it Patrick being Patrick, with a fond and helpless smile, as though his pattern of starting and not finishing things was simply one of his more charming personality traits, rather than something the rest of us had been quietly absorbing the cost of for the better part of 2 decades. The dinner that year was at my parents' home on Collinwood Road. I had arranged the catering through a company I knew, one that handled office events for my firm. 18 people. The final invoice came to $1,847, which I put on my card and mentioned to no one. The same way I had mentioned nothing about the $612 I had quietly added to my father's property tax estimated payment the previous September when his account came up short, and he made a passing comment to my mother about it on a Sunday phone call that I happened to be part of. I handled it. I did not announce that I had handled it. That was the pattern. It had been the pattern for 11 years. The first time was in January of 2013, when my parents' water heater failed in the middle of a cold week and they were short $843, and my mother called me because, as she said, "You're the one who knows how to handle these things, Rosalind." I handled it. I kept handling it. I set up a standing monthly transfer to their household account. I added Patrick's car insurance to my auto-pay when he moved back and asked me to cover it temporarily, $225 a month. And we both understood what temporarily meant in our family's vocabulary. I kept a buffer fund in a secondary account for their emergencies. I paid for the holiday dinners. I paid for the birthday arrangements when no one else had organized anything. I did all of this the way I did most things in my family, quietly, efficiently, and without expecting anyone to notice. I told myself this was what it meant to be part of a family. That families absorbed each other's shortfalls, that the capable ones carried more, and that this was not unfair, it was simply how things distributed themselves. I told myself this for 11 years, and for most of that time I more or less believed it. The morning of Christmas, Sylvie came over early to help me set up. She drove herself now, which still caught me off guard sometimes, the fact of my daughter being a person who drove a car. She put out the good napkins, the white linen ones with the small embroidered border that had belonged to my grandmother, while I arranged the centerpiece my coworker Donna had helped me assemble the week before. Pine branches and dried orange slices and 3 white taper candles in a low copper bowl I had found at an estate sale on 5th Street. It was a simple thing, but it was lovely. I stood in the doorway of the dining room for a moment before anyone arrived, just long enough to look at what we had made, and I felt something uncomplicated and good. The kind of feeling that belongs entirely to the moment before other people enter a room. Then people arrived, and the uncomplicated part was over. Patrick came in with his girlfriend Krista, who I had met twice before and found genuinely pleasant, and he was already mid-story before he had his coat off. Something about a business contact he had made at a golf event in October, someone with capital who was interested in a concept Patrick had been developing. My father turned away from the kitchen counter when Patrick started talking. He turned the way a sunflower turns toward light. Completely. Without apparent deliberation. As though some internal compass had simply reoriented, and that was the natural direction now. My Aunt Cheryl and her husband arrived. My cousin Deborah came with her husband and their 2 children. My mother's friend Ruth came because she had nowhere else to be, and my mother had mentioned it in passing on a phone call 3 weeks prior, and I had said of course, which was always my answer to that particular kind of mention. The caterers arrived and set up quietly in the kitchen, and I thanked them and directed them and thought briefly about what their own Christmas plans looked like. I got through the appetizers. I got through the soup course, which was a butternut squash with a swirl of cream that I had specifically requested because it was my father's preferred winter soup, a detail no one remarked upon. I got through the main course, during which my father asked Patrick twice about the golf contact, the second time loudly enough that the whole table could hear, and Patrick held court in his easy way, the way he always had, and everyone around the table leaned slightly toward him the way people lean toward a fire when the room is cold. I watched it. I had been watching it for 40 years. It no longer felt like something was being taken from me. It felt like something had been settled a long time ago in a negotiation I was never part of, and everyone in the room knew the terms except possibly me. The woman from the catering company who was refilling water glasses had her name embroidered on the breast pocket of her jacket.
Tamara.
I noticed it and thought about her for a moment, where she was going after this, whether she had a dinner of her own to get to, whether anyone at her table would notice the work she had put in. I do not entirely know why that thought arrived when it did. I think my attention needed somewhere to go that was not the spectacle at the other end of the table. Then my father stood up. He reached for his wine glass, one of the stemmed ones from the set my parents received as a wedding gift 43 years ago. Glasses I had washed by hand the last time I was at the house because the dishwasher runs too hot for them, and he tapped the rim with the flat of his knife. The sound carried. "I want to say something," he said, "before we get to dessert." The table settled into the particular quiet of people who sense an announcement coming. My mother folded her hands in her lap. Sylvie, sitting to my left, shifted slightly in her chair. Deborah's youngest stopped arguing with her brother about something under the table. My father looked down the length of the table. Not at the room. Not at me. At Patrick. He had the warmth in his voice that he kept for Patrick specifically, the warmth you only notice is being kept somewhere when you have spent a long time watching it not appear for you. "To my son," he said. He raised his glass. "The one who made it." People raised their glasses. The room made the sound rooms make when everyone moves at once. A small collective murmur. Someone said, "Hear, hear." Krista put her hand on Patrick's arm. My mother was smiling. I was sitting 4 feet away from my father. I had paid for the dinner. I had been paying for things in this family for 11 years, a total I had never calculated all at once because some part of me had understood that adding it up would require me to do something with the number. I was 4 feet from a man who had just looked past me to raise a glass, and the only thing I could think, clearly and without drama, was, "I am done sitting here." I set down my fork. I placed my napkin beside my plate, folded. I stood up. I was not shaking. I noticed this with some detachment. I had expected shaking. There was none. I was very still, the way a room is still after a window has been opened and the air has equalized. I walked to the front hallway. I took my coat from the closet, the navy wool one, the one with the missing third button I had been meaning to replace since October. I put it on. I picked up my purse from the hook inside the closet door. I took my keys from the porcelain bowl on the hallway table. From the dining room, my daughter's voice. "Mom?" I said, "I'll text you." I opened the front door. The cold December air came in immediately, the flat cold of an Ohio winter afternoon. It was 3:17 p.m. The sky was a uniform white, the kind of white that has no weather left in it. I went down the front steps of my parents' house on Collinwood Road, and I did not turn around. No one called after me. Not one voice. I sat in the Honda Civic in the driveway for 38 minutes. I want to be honest about those 38 minutes. Everything I have described up to this point sounds, when I lay it out this way, like a woman who knew exactly what she was doing. And the truth is that I did know. Intellectually, I knew. But there is a distance between knowing a thing in your mind and being ready for it in your body, and that distance was the 38 minutes I sat in that car with the engine off and my hands in my lap. I thought about Sylvie inside at the table. I hoped she would not feel compelled to leave, because I had left. She had her own relationship with this family, her own particular fondness for her grandfather that was separate from my experience of him, and I did not want my leaving to collapse into hers. I hoped she would have dessert. I hoped the disruption would settle into something she could navigate without me in the room, making it heavier by my presence or my absence. I thought about the centerpiece in the copper bowl and whether anyone would think to keep the candles from burning too low. I thought about the catering invoice that was still open in a tab on my laptop at home, the one I had been about to close out and file. At 3:19 p.m., I checked my phone. Nothing. At 3:41 p.m., still nothing. At 3:55 p.m., a text from Sylvie. "Are you okay?" I typed back, "Yes. Have dessert. I love you." Then I started the car. I backed down the driveway. I drove home through streets that were almost entirely empty, the particular emptiness of Christmas afternoon in a Midwestern city, when everyone is either inside with people or driving between them, and the roads belong to no one. Losing an illusion is still better than living inside one. I did not think that sentence consciously as I drove. It came to me later. But I think it was already true in me by the time I reached my own street, by the time I pulled into my own driveway and sat for a moment looking at my own house with the lights I had left on. I went inside and I made tea, the Earl Grey from the dented tin on the second shelf above the stove, and I sat at my kitchen table, and I did not cry. I did not feel relief, exactly. I did not feel grief, exactly. I felt like someone who had been carrying something heavy for so long that the weight had stopped feeling like a weight and started feeling like a self, and I had just set it down, and my arms did not yet know what to do with being empty. I called Donna at 7 that evening. Donna is my coworker, and she has been my closest friend for the better part of 12 years, and she had been telling me, in her plain-spoken and persistent way, for at least 2 of those years, that I was running a support system for people who had arranged their lives around the assumption that I would always be there to fill the gaps. She picked up on the second ring. I told her what had happened. I told her about the toast, the 4 feet of table between me and my father, the coat, the driveway, the 38 minutes. She was quiet for a moment. "Are you okay?" she said. "I think I am," I said. "Did you eat anything?" "No." "I'm bringing food," she said. And she came, 40 minutes later, with containers from the Lebanese place she knows I like, and we sat at my kitchen table until nearly midnight. She did not tell me I had done the right thing or the wrong thing. She told me about the first time she had walked away from something that was costing her more than it was giving her, and what the weeks after had looked like, and what had eventually settled. She just sat there, across from me, eating rice and talking and occasionally laughing about something unrelated to any of it, and that was exactly what I needed. Family is whoever shows up when there is nothing to gain. I did not cancel the standing transfers immediately. I want to be clear about this, because the version of this story where I came home on Christmas night and shut everything down in one decisive motion is a tidier story than the one that actually happened. What actually happened is that I sat with it through December and into January, thinking carefully, which is how I move through most things. Not because I owed them a careful deliberation, because I owed myself one. In the second week of January, I called Carly, an attorney I had worked with on a property matter several years earlier. I sat across from her in her office and I laid out the complete picture. 11 years, the ongoing transfers, the bill payments, the emergency fund, the car insurance, the holiday catering, all of it. I had brought the green folder from my kitchen drawer, the one where I keep 3 years of personal bank statements, and I set it on her desk. She looked through it for a long time without speaking. "You never had any written agreement for any of this?" she said. "No." She nodded once. She asked several precise questions. I answered them. We talked for just over an hour. By the end, I had a clear and unsentimental picture of where I stood. Legally, I was owed nothing back because there had been no formal arrangement, no documentation of expectation. But I was also obligated to nothing going forward. The transfers were voluntary. They had always been voluntary. The fact that they had become load-bearing parts of other people's financial lives was not, legally or morally, my permanent responsibility. It was a habit. And habits can be ended. I drove home, and I sat at my kitchen table with the small handwritten ledger I keep for personal accounts, separate from the digital systems I use at work, a habit from my grandmother, who did not entirely trust what she could not hold in her hands, and I opened it to the first entry in January of 2013. I added the column. I had never added the full column before. I had known the individual amounts. I had not looked at the sum. The total was $68,419. I sat with that number for a long time. I looked at it the way you look at something you've been carrying in a bag, without knowing its weight. 11 years. $68,419. A down payment. A college fund. A decade of Tuesday nights out and vacations not taken, and repairs to the passenger door of the Honda Civic perpetually deferred. I did not feel rage looking at it. I felt something cleaner and colder than rage. I felt the particular clarity of a window that has finally been washed. On the 14th of January, on a Tuesday morning, I opened my laptop at the kitchen table at 7:50 a.m. while the Earl Grey was still steeping. I canceled the standing transfer to my parents' household account. I canceled the auto pay on Patrick's car insurance. I removed my card from the emergency buffer account and transferred the balance to my own savings. The whole process took 22 minutes. Then I closed the laptop and drove to work. I did not write a letter. I did not make a call. I did not explain. 6 weeks after Christmas, my father called me at 6:32 p.m. on a Wednesday. I was at the kitchen table with Sylvie, the two of us working through a history project she had spread across the whole surface, timelines and index cards, and a printout of something she had found that she kept referring to as the primary source, with a slightly reverent tone she reserves for things she has discovered independently. I looked at my father's name on the screen. I let it go to voicemail. He called again at 6:47. I let that one go as well. At 7:04 he called a third time, and I picked up.
"Rosalind," he said.
"Hi, Dad." There was a pause. My father did not pause often. He was a man who filled silence as a matter of habit, who treated quiet in a conversation the way he treated space in a room, as something to be occupied before anyone else could. "We've had some issues with the accounts," he said. His voice was carefully level. "Patrick's insurance lapsed. And there was a shortfall on the property tax estimated payment that the accountant flagged." "I know," I said. Another pause. Longer this time. "You canceled them," he said. "I did." Without saying anything to anyone. "Yes." I heard the refrigerator running in the background of wherever he was, and the low sound of the television my mother keeps on in the evenings, and the specific quality of silence from my father that meant he was deciding how to say what he had already decided. "I'd like to understand why," he said. I had thought, over the previous 6 weeks, about this moment. I had thought about the long version, the version that included every entry in the ledger going back to January 2013. I had thought about the medium version, the one where I explained the pattern and named what it had cost me. I had thought about the version where I asked him how it had felt to raise a glass to Patrick with me 4 feet away, whether that had registered at all, whether there had been a fraction of a second where he had noticed and made a choice. In the end, I chose the shortest version. "You toasted Patrick," I said. I was 4 feet away. I had paid for the dinner. The silence this time was different. It was the silence of a man who had not been expecting that specific sentence. "That's not," he started. He stopped. Then, "Patrick has had a harder time of it." "I know you believe that," I said. "Rosalind." He said my name the way he said it when he needed me to be reasonable, which was the way he said it most often when I was being reasonable and he was not ready for it. "Dad," I said, "I'm not angry. I need you to understand that. I'm not calling anyone. I'm not asking for anything back. I'm telling you that I'm not paying for things anymore. That's all." He said I was being dramatic. He said I had always had a tendency to make things about myself. He said Patrick genuinely had not known, which I believed, and which also was not the point. He said my mother was upset. He said he hoped I understood what I was doing to the family by behaving this way. I listened to all of it. I did not interrupt. I did not argue. I did not give him the scene he was perhaps expecting, the one where I matched his volume or his grievance. When he was finished, I said, "I hope you have a good evening, Dad." I said goodbye. I hung up. Sylvie was watching me from the other side of the kitchen table over the edge of her timeline project. She had the expression she uses when she is processing something she does not yet have the language to name. "Okay," she said. "Okay," I said. I looked at her project. Where were we? She found her place. We kept working. In the months that followed, the family communications arrived through the channels families use when they are not quite willing to contact you directly. My cousin Deborah sent a text in February, warm and careful, saying she had heard and she hoped things would smooth over with time. My Aunt Cheryl called in March, and we had a conversation that was ostensibly about how I was doing and was actually about how confused and hurt my father was and how family was family. I thanked her for calling. I did not explain myself. I had spent a long time explaining myself to people who had not requested the explanation when it might have made a difference. Patrick called once in April. He sounded genuinely bewildered, and I believed the bewilderment was real. Patrick had never been paying close enough attention to notice the architecture of what I had been doing. He was not cruel. He was simply a man who had grown up in a house where someone else handled things and had continued living that way without ever examining it. "I didn't know," he said, "any of it. I want you to know that." "I believe you," I said. "Why didn't you just say something?" he said. "To any of us. Why didn't you just say something?" I heard in the question everything that had always been true about our family. He meant it kindly. The question itself assumed that saying something was a straightforward option, that there had been a table where I could have raised a concern and been heard, that the room had ever been configured that way. It had not. I had learned very young that in my family, the capable one did not raise concerns. The capable one handled things. Raising a concern was something you did when you were the kind of person whose concerns warranted attention. I should have, I said, because it was true and because it was mine to own. I know that. He did not know what to do with that, so we talked about Sylvie for a few minutes and then said goodbye, and that was where we left it. Not good. Not bad. Unresolved, which felt appropriate for where we were. I kept seeing Dr. Osei on Tuesday afternoons. In a session in May, he asked me how I was holding the contact from family members, the calls, the texts through intermediaries, the general pressure that had been applied in the months since January. I thought about it. Like someone standing at the edge of a pool being asked to get back in, I said. And realizing that I don't particularly want to swim.
He wrote something.
He asked if I felt guilty. Some days, I said. Less than I expected. What do you feel on the other days? He said. I thought about the tea on the counter in the mornings. I thought about Sylvie's sheet music on the kitchen table. I thought about the December night Donna came over, and we sat until midnight eating rice and laughing about things that had nothing to do with any of this. Lighter, I said. I feel lighter. I will tell you what I know now, standing on the other side of it. I know that leaving a table is not the same as leaving a family. But I also know that sometimes leaving the table is the only honest way to find out which one you are actually part of. I know that $68,419 was not the cost of keeping the peace. The cost of keeping the peace was something else entirely, something that cannot be entered in a ledger or canceled on a Tuesday morning in 22 minutes. It lives in the body. It costs the body quietly over years. The money was only the part of it I could count. Forgiveness is not access. Understanding is not reunion. Compassion is not a key to anyone's front door. I have compassion for my father. I understand the shape of his disappointment with himself, how old it was, how much it needed somewhere to land, and how I was always there and always reliable and therefore always the safest person to overlook. I understand it the way you understand weather. Not because it is acceptable to leave someone standing in the rain, but because rain does not choose its direction. Some people only know how to love what they can control. Choosing not to be controlled is not a punishment. It is a fact. It is simply the new terms. Saying no did not make me cruel. It made me responsible. Responsible for the life that was waiting for me on the other side of a habit I had confused with an obligation. The cost of keeping the peace in a house where peace means being the smallest person in the room is your whole life. I paid that cost for 11 years in dollars and 30 more in silence, and I do not say that for pity. I say it because I think you may know the arithmetic of it, the transfers that go unacknowledged, the dinners you arrange and pay for and set the table for while someone else gets the toast. The way you keep adding the column and never looking at the total because some part of you knows that if you see the number you will have to decide what to do with it. In December, Sylvie asked me if we were going to Grandpa's for Christmas this year. I told her that I didn't think so. She thought about it for a moment. Sylvie is a thinker, always has been. And then she said, "We could have it here. I'll set the table." "I'd like that," I said. She put out the linen napkins. The embroidered ones. She put the copper bowl in the center and filled it with pine branches she had cut from the tree in the backyard and 3 white candles, and it looked exactly right. We had 8 people around that table. Every one of them had been invited on purpose. Every one of them stayed until the candles burned low and the conversation had nowhere left to go, and no one wanted to be the first to leave. If you have ever sat at a table where someone looked right past you to praise someone else, where you were 4 feet away and might as well have been in another county, if you have ever folded your napkin and understood very clearly and without drama that you were done, what would you have done with that understanding? Would you have stayed for dessert and filed it away the way you had filed everything else? Or would you have picked up your coat and your keys and walked to the door? The leaving is not the hard part. Once you finally stand up, the leaving takes about 11 minutes. The hard part was every Christmas you stayed seated, adding to a column you were not yet ready to total.